talking about the Denver Green Building Policy, which is actually it's not implemented yet. But I felt this group was a very good audience to hear where it is currently, and talking about how that came out of the Green Roof Initiative and what we're seeing as far as the sustainability benefits that come from it. It is specifically focused, it is only focused on multifamily and commercial buildings in Denver. So it doesn't apply to residential. So the subject is talking about multifamily existing, multifamily new, commercial existing, commercial new is what we're talking about. All right, well, I will jump in and keep us rolling. So quick background, and these are details especially that I can ask John to help fill in if I've gotten anything incorrect. But just not quite a year ago, voters voted on a referenda in Denver to say buildings 25,000 square feet or larger must put a living roof on their building at the time that they'd be replacing a roof or time of new construction. It passed. I know this, for many people, this may not seem like a big margin that passed by, but it's actually quite significant for something that was that forward-thinking in what it was. The forward-thinkingness caused many building owners and developers to freak out, to put it very bluntly. They were like, what the heck just happened on this past November day? The outcry came because I loved where the people were coming from who put together this initiative, but they didn't come from a background of structural engineering, for one. And so one of the challenges that came up with this was like, some of our roofs can't even support the snow load that we get on the rooftop. We're supposed to put something else on top of it, and the subsequent grief and headache that would come from that. So what was very good, the city took this right away and said, we need to get not only the people involved that put the initiative on the ballot, because we absolutely need their participation to avoid, one, to get the spirit of what they were trying to do with the initiative completely included in any revision, and that's what this Green Task Force was looking to do, is a revision to address the fact that many rooftops couldn't support what could be put on them. But two, honestly, just to also avoid potential lawsuit, because they'd be perfectly in their legal bounds if the city just changed the referenda to say, no, you can't do that. You can't just change this to make it work, without input and without our consent. So that group has been working since January? Yes. Since January. They released a draft in June, and I'm putting it out there as January 18 that this could be moved into a final policy, which I'll get into much more of the heart of what it is, but this is just the overview. But what's that? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't change that. My bad. Thank you. We're going back in time. So January 19. I originally was putting November. I thought that was too optimistic. What do you think, Jen?
Probably optimistic.
Okay, so January is more realistic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe December.
Okay. Okay. So coming soon, though. We've got that working forward. So just really quickly, benefits. If people have not had a chance to see living roofs, there are a few around the area. Thinking of, does Denver Public Library have one? Or I know there's one down.
One of the schools at UCD.
Okay, has one.
And also the Denver EPA, which
right.
is right down by Union Station.
Okay, has it. They're not common. This shot I took offline of an area actually that is in Uruguay, as I understood it. So I was like, interesting. It's like, but it's basically putting living plants on top of a rooftop to do things to reduce primarily, heat island effect is the goal of that. If many of you people in the lab probably notice, maybe other people are nerdy enough to notice this, but if you're ever in downtown Denver on a summer evening and then you drive out to a more suburban area, you find that's like, oh, my car's saying it's 80 degrees downtown, and you move out to the suburb area, even after the sun has gone down, 75 or 76 degrees. That's a simple measure of the fact that there's more mass, there's more material absorbing the sun's heat and radiating it back during the day and as well at night. And the goal, part of the goal of green roofs is to try and help minimize that. It also, of course, is producing oxygen in an area where it wouldn't be. The plant's converting carbon dioxide into oxygen. Helps reduce noise pollution. Can certainly increase the longevity of the roof, but talking to many roofing companies, they're like, we foresee lots of problems, potentially, by putting a living roof onto an existing building. That could cause that they're doing more work and not less, but it's one of the goals. And city beautification is improved. And without question, if you're ever in a building where you're up high enough to look at the tops of other rooftops, tops of rooftops are not attractive. There's nothing about it that's redeeming, in my opinion. Maybe some architects could find something, I don't know. But it's like, but you look at something that's living, and it certainly is far more pleasing to the eye, pleasing to us. So they also can work in tandem with solar and create vegetation, on the rooftops, making the rooftop cooler. And just an emphasis of what the task force is looking at. Again, they're not saying you have to do this immediately. It's only at the time of normal roof replacement that you'd be required to do this. Talking with many people that own buildings, they're saying, well, we'll probably work ever harder to patch our roof for a little while longer. But, eventually it comes. Either it's a hailstorm or just the wear of the sun in our climate. It's time that you need to replace it, and they'll be doing that. So, other cities that have adopted this, just real quickly, San Francisco and Toronto both have green roof requirements. North American cities. Chicago issues permits faster if you incorporate a green roof. Washington, D.C. gives a rebate per square foot of green roof area. So, is there any others I may have missed?
No, that's
okay. So it's small still where it's happening. It certainly happens more in Europe. There's a lot of European areas. It's happening evidently in South America as well. In areas, but so jumping into what this task force is working to do to transition that green roof initiative into a green building policy, to put it really succinctly, they sat down with the people that had, that pushed for the initiative and said, what were your overall goals? And the feedback that they got, as I understand it, is to say, well, we wanted to improve sustainability, not just we're not just like green roofs or die. That was not what they were saying. It's like, no, is it what can we do to make it more sustainable in our city? And they went on that path and did a great job of getting it out there for people to vote on. So when they started talking to them about the fact that sustainability was the goal, the city said, well, great, we can look at options around solar. We can look at options around energy efficiency and have that be a part of the conversation and part of a broader policy to meet the spirit of what you said you wanted to achieve. So they've been working on that, and I like data, so I hope you guys like data too, but a big part of what they've put together, the city has done a great job in the last 3 years now with the Energized Denver initiative and requiring benchmarking of utility bills of all commercial buildings that are over 25,000 square feet. So there's finally some data. There's finally some information that's being collected really on energy usage. It was not, I know some people might think, well, Excel had all that information and they look at it regularly, they understand it. Excel was dumbfounded when the city came to them. They're like, we have to try and pull together what? What do we have to get together for you guys to get? No one in Excel was looking at it as an aggregate to say how much energy is being used by buildings, and thus what is the impact environmentally of these buildings, until they said, you got to benchmark your bills and we have to start collecting data. And I'll show you a little later just the web page where you can look at the Energized Denver website of what they've collected. But it's from this collection of information that the city is determined, and I think they've done a great job of it, that 57% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions, that's accounting for travel, people driving through the city, as well as residential buildings, as well as what other manufacturing might happen outside of a building. I guess probably really transportation and then basically residential. 50% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions, they calculated at 2 million tons annually, coming from the buildings, the commercial buildings in Denver. So they said, well, we can take a big bite out of that problem through this policy to make things far more sustainable with our bigger buildings. So again, as I said in the beginning, the ordinance is focused only on commercial and multifamily buildings. It's not applying to residential properties at all as a requirement, but it sinks into the fact that they've had this mandate from the city council to require benchmarking of utility bills of buildings 25,000 square feet and larger. So, as I've touched on this already, the task force came together from staff, community members, the advocates who got the initiative on the ballot to look at energy efficiency, solar, and living roofs in its entirety. not just limiting it to green roofs. So as of June, there was a release by the task force that John sits on that was shared with the city council members. And from that, we've done some summaries, but key things that the ordinance right now, the green roofs policy is looking like it's going to become. Again, this isn't passed yet. There could be some changes, but it's looking like it's going to become a combination of this, where you must do a cool roof at the time you put on a roof, you're replacing your rooftop. And a cool roof has basically been defined for quite a long time. It's simply a high albedo or a highly reflective roof surface, so you're not absorbing the sun's heat into your building, and instead giving it back to the atmosphere at that point. And you say, well, how does that help with the whole issue of heat island effect? Doesn't that make it worse that we're radiating that heat right back into the atmosphere? You may not understand it, but how it works is basically it's better to put it back to the atmosphere right away instead of it being absorbed into the material of the building or the thermal mass of the building and then sitting and radiating back for hours and hours and hours thereafter. So that is a big part, but then you can choose one of these following pathways. And I must touch on this one right away and then kind of move past it. This one is really only going to be economically viable for new construction. And I don't mean to dismiss that, but the big bulk of our problem is our existing buildings, as we saw how much pollution they're creating. And yes, we're adding new buildings, and it'll be good that there's an option for certification through LEED certification, Enterprise Green Communities, or equivalent certifications to say you're building a more energy efficient building, but it doesn't get at, like I said, the nut of the problem. So, but that's a pathway for that. These other paths, these other four, I mean, this one's for new construction as well, if you want to do this. But basically, these other three are really good alternatives for existing, but also options for new construction. I'll touch on this one first. This one's very interesting. Pay for off-site green. Basically, they're proposing an option which is very smart for them to do it, to say, pay a tax. Mr. Building Owner or Miss Building Owner, pay a tax. You get no benefit for paying this tax directly, but what you're doing is you're making sure that solar or energy efficiency improvements, I mean, there will be some benefit. It might come back to groups, like groups doing improvements to make homes more efficient and things like that. It may go to that, but it's a very interesting proposition, and building owners I've spoken with thus far, of course, are like, I don't want to pay for something where I don't get some return on the investment directly to my property. I'm sure we'll come across a few people that say, I'd rather just give it away and not mess with my building, and having to put solar on or make it more energy efficient be a challenge, so I'll just pay the tax. To the credit of the task force, what I'm seeing is they're thinking things through very well and giving much greater flexibility to building owners or people that are building new buildings to be able to meet this criteria than how the initiative, how the referenda got passed. So quickly, I want to just say, we'll look at kind of these options for right now, just through an example. So this is actually a building that we've had one conversation with the building owner thus far, and we'll see where things go. But it's a two-story, 32,000 approximately square foot building. It has 1,601 square feet of roof area. It has had some hail damage done by our roof, to their roof, and so they are in communication with their insurance company about the potential of how they could get paid back on that. But I point out this as something that I believe architects, real estate agents, people who work in this industry are going to start to become more familiar with if they're dealing with properties in Denver, because this is the score, the benchmarking score, basically, of the property, and quickly gives an insight as to how good or how bad this building is, because the score of 6 is on a scale of 0 to 100, with 0 being really bad and 100 being really amazing. This building is they're keeping Xcel Energy happily in business right now by how much they're giving away through their inefficiency in their building. The building was built in 1972, and it reflects that they've not really done anything to improve it since when it comes to the performance side of the building. They've done some things aesthetically, but they haven't done anything performance-wise to really help it. So this building, a target that we throw out and the city's throwing out is say, okay, well, their bill right now is $40,000 a year. You know, a savings of $10,000 a year makes a very nice return for making a building more comfortable, more profitable at the time of sale, and just overall more sustainable. It's nice to get paid back 10 grand a year if you're doing something that helps you in so many other ways. As I've always said about like houses, if granite countertops could actually pay people back, I think they'd be awesome. But it's amazing how many people choose them anyway. It's like, but they never pay it. You know, they pay you back, I guess, a little bit at the time of sale. But it's interesting how energy efficiency can pay you back right away. So building off of the model from 2 slides ago and then that specific case, this gets a bit detailed, so I'll let you look at it for a little bit, but we're basically boiling it down to trying to start doing some comparison of which steps end up being more cost effective for this project. One thing we need to do, and I just didn't take the time to do it prior to the presentation, is this cost for energy efficiency is we're still getting some pricing information really on it, but basically we're trying to estimate what it might cost to make improvements to this property. And at $2.50 a square foot, we're using that based on some past projects we've worked on. That's not per square foot of roof area. That's per square foot of the 32,000 square feet of building. So, so it gets into a price more in the $69,000 of total cost to do the energy efficiency. And people might say, well, why would I ever do that? Why wouldn't I just do this? This is going to be cheaper. I'll just do that. And some people may. But then again, the green roof doesn't give you the benefits of making it more comfortable. It doesn't address the fact that the people that are working in that space are saying, I have a hard time working in this space because it's so cold in the middle of summer and it's so dang hot at other times of the year, and just the challenges that come with buildings that haven't been maintained or thought about how they integrate to perform well. And they'd say, well, why would I ever do solar? Well, it's like solar may cost this much, but you add in the tax benefits, assuming the business owner, building owner can take advantage of tax benefits that still exist at the 30% level, and utility bill savings, and it gets to be quite significant. To double check why Bill put that in there. But anyway, it's basically, there'll be conversations. And what I think is going to be very powerful about this and policy coming into place is it gives us the opportunity to have conversations, to look at options with people and give them a roadmap to decide which way do you want to go, which one, do you feel better about making the world a better place, more sustainable? Okay, maybe it's a combination of this and this. If like, whatever's the cheapest, well, maybe this, but then again, you're giving up some other benefits that come along with looking at these options. And in many cases, these things will end up being less expensive than a green roof, or the solar will be. But this is in this given example. And I want to be fair to it, to show it that way. But it's going to have the challenge. I mean, because like on this one, we're not accounting for, like in this cost, because this is provided by a partner firm we work with called EcoRoof. We're not assessing yet. They're not assessing yet what's going to have to be done structurally to reinforce it. That suddenly might make it 3 times as expensive to actually do this. And it's like, well, that one's off the option block, so we're back to these options being the way we would go about doing it. So it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out with each of these jobs. So this is a screenshot cutaway of the Energize Denver website. We've been looking at so much, I start to see things now in this one. There's more and more. But basically, these are showing 1,286 buildings that are 25,000 square feet or larger spread across the city of Denver. And they have the data on them to know that these buildings are 15% office, 23% apartment, 10% condominium, 5% municipal, 5% hotel, 8% school, 6% distribution center, 5% non-refrigerated warehouse, 4% manufacturing, mixed use of 1%, college university 2%, and then the other of 16%. And we look at a lot of the others, we find a lot of them are apartment buildings. So I'm like, why are they being designated as other? But anyway, they've done a good breakout to see what is there in the buildings across the city. So that market potential, when we talk with our partner firm, like I said, EcoRoof, and we have another partner firm that we work with, Solar Power Pros, when we look at these opportunities, basically, there's 84 million square feet of roof area. And the salespeople at EcoRoof, their eyes get really big when I bring up that number. Like, hey, I'm here. What are we talking about? 84 million square feet of things for me to sell? Sweet. Okay. This is fantastic. So they estimate that's $8 a square foot that they'll be charging just to do the cool roof part of it. So it is, for roofing companies, a very big opportunity. For all of those, when all of those are done, $62 million with that. So we see it also by looking at, okay, we're trying to guesstimate a mix of energy efficiency, solar, green roof. Okay, another $135 million spent there. So I suppose it's good there aren't any building owners. They might start throwing things at me as I'm like, what? I'm spending $800 million? We're all going to be doing this to make this place more sustainable? Okay, yeah. But that's where the market potential is looking like it's at. But on the sustainability side, it's what resonates with my heart, and I hope it resonates with many of yours as well. It's tremendous, enormous what can be done with this. Again, we're just starting with that benchmark assumption, 25% reduction in energy use, whether that's because of solar or it's because of energy efficiency. It would be really those options. In these 1,286 buildings, it'd be a 14.25% reduction in the city's overall greenhouse gas emissions. And this works out to being basically 500,000 fewer tons of CO2 less being released into the atmosphere. I can never get my head or my mind around what a ton of CO2 is, so I'm going to show that to you in the slide right after this, but 500,000 tons of CO2 being reduced. The other side is, what's the opportunity to save for a typical building? This is one of our clients that we've worked with for a long time. It's an assisted living facility, 2 buildings, but so I use them as an example a lot. But this data actually comes from looking at data from the city as well as from our own experience. But 31 to 55% of the energy used in buildings is wasted. Now, Ed and others here would say we could have a long talk over beer about where do we define waste versus necessity in energy use, but there's a very big chunk that's just like, because we're just not paying attention to the store, type of thing. We're just not dialed into what we're doing with that. For a typical 40,000 square foot building, which is many of the buildings we get to have the pleasure of working with, $28,000 to $49,000 that they're just saying, Xcel or other utility companies, thank you, here you go. Stay in business. We like keeping you in business. It's a very good thing. So, what is the opportunity to enhance sustainability in all buildings? Well, building off of that, if we go from the 1,286 to the 6,045, we have a lot of small buildings that are under 25,000 square feet in the city of Denver. So keep going with that. The impact gets to be less, and I'm really just kind of guessing at it right now because we don't have good data for it, but I would guess it's at least getting into that 700,000 ton range. So here's what a ton of CO2 looks like, from a very good illustration from people in Britain that created this years ago. But I love it. It's like, okay, can I get my hands around, even a pound? What is that? What does that take up volume-wise? Well, there's a metric ton, anyway, of CO2, and it's really very comparable to an English ton. But basically, it's a lot of volume. So 500,000 of those, well, 2 million of those, every year associated with the buildings in the city of Denver. And that's even with the very good things that have been happening at the utility level to have more renewable energy be in the mix. That's where it currently stands. We keep seeing that, of course, this gets smaller, which is wonderful. But the buildings still are creating a lot of problems as far as the amount of pollution that they put up into the air. So an additional piece of trivia that I had fun digging into this one, so I hope you guys enjoy this one. These buildings, the commercial buildings in Denver, consume 3 times the electricity, nearly 4 times the total energy of all of Denver's single-family homes. So to have the equivalent impact, if we cut 25% of that wasted energy, to have the equivalent impact on the residential side, all homes in Denver have to become net zero. So it's wonderful what we do with our homes, But the pig in the room that needs to be altered are these big commercial buildings and these multifamily buildings that are going crazy, using energy like it's finite, or like it's infinite, excuse me, but instead of being finite.
You're limiting yourself to electricity, not natural gas.
Well, that's where I expand like the 4 times. You know, it's like the natural gas part of it, there's much more electricity used by these buildings than natural gas, but that's why about approximately 4 times the amount of total energy. So yeah, not trying to limit myself to that.
And you also have some central steam.
You're very right. And do people know that there's many buildings in Denver that are heated by a central steam plant? If you notice as you're driving down city streets, especially when the weather's cool in Denver, there'll be steam coming up out of manhole grates. That's part of a centralized, it was really very forward thinking, it still is, even at the time it was done, but to have a centralized power plant dedicated to create heat for many of the buildings in Denver. That's another part why the natural gas isn't nearly as high in a lot of the buildings. So our approach, as a company for 21 years, what we do with building owners, we listen, we analyze, we understand, and then we deliver a path for compliance. So basically we're getting concerns, understanding where they're coming from, understanding the building, basically, or understand where they're coming from, the operation of the building. Then we analyze the building, doing level 1 through level 3 ASHRAE compliant energy audits, and then computer modeling to achieve goals with the Denver Green Building Policy. And we deliver the path for compliance because we have partnerships with people like John to say, okay, you now need to do $300,000 of improvements. You don't have that laying around? Good. Let's talk with John about PACE financing or other financing options to have that done so you can come into compliance. We also, just on the new construction side, but actually we can certify existing buildings for Energy Star, but we do Energy Star and Enterprise Green Communities certification. So there's our plug about us. But we have, as I've alluded to, put together a team of companies right now that are working together, making ready for the finalized Denver Green Building Policy to come out to say, Mr. Building owner, you need a one-stop shop location to be able to meet this. If you are scattered and trying to piece this stuff together on your own, it can be very challenging. So we are working together to say, good, when you call for your roof replacement, you get Lightly Treading and Solar Power Pros as your tandem with that to give you pricing and to give you solutions to be able to meet this as quickly and as cost effectively as possible, and going through the charting process I showed before to say, here are your options, here's the different costs that would come with that, and then be able to get to that point. So with that, I'm at questions, and we can talk about this philosophically, and we can get John involved too. So, yep, Jim.
How does the ordinance deal with slope roofs? This assumption is flat roofs, but you got a lot of commercial buildings with peaked roofs, and Eco's own logo has a peaked roof.
I know, exactly. They show a sloped roof. So, John, I think I know the answer, but I'm happy to let you.
Okay, so there, in the original ordinance, there was an opportunity to get there were actually 2 ways to exit the compliance responsibility, and because we made more pathways available to a building owner, we think there will be very few instances where there is not some way that building can comply. But if it's a sloped roof, it can probably still accommodate solar, but it won't accommodate vegetative roof. And so that building owner would have to look at other forms of compliance. There's also an exclusion for what's called an architectural feature. So like a spire roof on Denver DU, for example, would be exempt. So there are a few small exemptions, but in the original ordinance there was contemplated more exemptions. So we actually think, as a result of offering more pathways, there will be less exemptions. But those kinds of problems will surface and exist.
Cool.
Yeah, I have a couple questions
Yeah.
that were done during it. I like your optimism for the fact that you don't think a lot of people will do the pay for offsite green. But knowing building owners, I see that as a
Right.
uphill battle. So one of my questions about that, is that a one-time fee? Because you say when you replace your roof, what happens 15 years from now and you replace your roof again?
My understanding is they'd have to pay it again or choose another option
Every time
they're replacing
so
a roof.
It's not a one-time fee, but it's not a yearly fee.
No.
Either. It's not like a yearly tax.
No. Okay, right.
And then, as part of that, what happens if they're tax exempt? Say it's a 25,000 square foot church, and that's truly a tax. Do they?
Right. And remember, this isn't I said it's a tax, but it's not officially a tax. It's paying, right, it's paying into a fund to get out of doing the improvements to your building. So I call it a tax, but it's not officially a tax.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then,
So they would still be required.
Well, if it's 25,000 square foot or larger, that's one, so some churches aren't that big. Also, there are some exemptions, and it's not on top of mind, but there are some peculiar exemptions, like, I think, like low-income housing or elderly housing. There are some, like, how can you put it, like special case exemptions having to do with the use of the building.
okay.
But there's not many of those, but a few.
All right. And then
And
that'll
follow up,
be
and then we'll
listed.
go back. Yeah.
And then, when that leads into my last question, which is kind of a semantics question too. Is this going to be part of the building code itself, or is it something else? Because when you had showed that example of hail damage, one of
Right.
the things I'm thinking from a building owner's standpoint is a lot of them have in their insurance policy to bring it up to current code standards.
Right.
If this is a code, then their insurance may have to pay
Right.
for some of those structural modifications or other modifications to bring it up to current code. But if it's not actually a code and it's just an amendment, or
An
something
ordinance,
else,
right,
or
an
an
ordinance,
ordinance,
right.
then the insurance company may not pay for that. And I don't know if you guys have dove into that, looking into how that actually is administered, because that may have a big impact on the insurance industry and how owners can actually go into
Good.
this.
So based on John's reaction, I'll say you're helping lift up an area that probably hasn't been lifted up enough yet in the conversations, but
Yeah, whether there would be additional insurance coverage to help support this is, I don't think it's clear. It might be case by case. There is one peculiar thing, one thing that was a consideration for building owners. If the reason for the new roof is damage from a hailstorm or some kind of accident, or plane hits building, something, then they have a much longer, they have like a longer timeline to do the energy compliance. So in other words, there could be like an emergency to get the roof resolved, and so they get that permit to get that done, and then they have like 4 or 5 years to do the energy compliance part. So there, but again, that's a little bit of a case by case thing, and I don't. We did insurance coverage was something that was discussed. I just don't remember how to respond to your question or your point, whether it increases the insurance the benefits I would get from my insurance policy or not.
cool.
I'm not certain.
Thank you, Jesse. So Martin?
One more question about the technology side of it. I mean, having a green roof is not per se plausible in terms of no leaks and so on. How does that work? What's the experience from Europe, maybe?
Well, what I've seen a little bit with the help of EcoRoof is that they can get from suppliers here that work in other parts of the world, as I understand it.
The compliance measurement is based on the roof size, but that can be placed on the ground. Similarly, that amount of green vegetative space could be added to what's already on the ground, and that would be a compliance path.
Right, exactly. So it's So areas that have larger parking lots will be, I'm sure, looking at those options, as well. So yeah, then back up here.
These multiple pathways in the second version, is that already passed?
Has
No,
not
that's-
passed.
Yeah, that's the thing that will happen in December or January.
Right. So the city council is going to have another briefing from the task force on October 11th, and that is a public hearing. I don't know the exact address.
It's about a week later.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I realized I didn't bring the dates with me, but I think it's like the 25th, so it's the 11th, and there will probably be 2 public hearings.
Okay. I know the next one's scheduled for the 11th as far as a
Yes.
public hearing goes, but you're thinking there's going to be another one after that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then the council would vote, in theory, maybe in November
Yeah, or December.
or in December, to then have it become implemented. It'd be interesting to see if it gets into code, but yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that this opens up a large market for innovation in low-weight, roof-protecting greenery.
Right.
But I was wondering, in your slides, whether you included the labor cost of maintaining or mowing your
No.
monoculture up there.
Right, so I'll go all the way back to that. We'll bring that, well, keep talking because this will take a while. But we'll go back to it. But yeah, that cost, whoop, I guess I'll go to this. No, I'll go to this one. There we go. Yeah, this right now, again, so we don't, well, it has maintenance and water use costs. That cost doesn't include that yet. So like I said, this isn't ready for us to share with a client yet because it's not incorporating that. But I wanted to be fair to say, okay, to install it, it's this. To install it, it's this. To install and retrofit is this. But you're absolutely right. This doesn't require maintenance at all. This is normal, ongoing operational stuff of having a facilities manager that's like paying attention to the thermostats and things like that. So it's not a change, but this one certainly adds maintenance without question. It adds watering, it adds maintenance costs to it. So good point. Yeah. Mhm. Right.
How is this going to be affected by a hailstorm? And
Yeah.
replacing that would be a learning process too.
It's a very good point. Many of the plants, many of the kind of hardy grasses and things that they have as cost-effective green roofs can withstand, minus exceptionally large hail. They'll recover from that. It's not like tomato plants and things like that, which people who garden, we all know they're toast. But it's like, but things like that will likely hold up well. But I don't know yet on data like with these flats that like EcoRoof talked about. Does the plastic get damaged? Does that cause problems? Honestly, that's an unknown yet, but great question. Good thought on that. So up here. Yeah.
Do you have information from other cities? Do they have these options, and maybe do they have those experience with?
Well, San Francisco and Toronto are the only ones currently in North America that are doing it. But
I would point out that one thing that sort of lit up the room when we were going through the task force process is when we all became educated on what Chicago has done. And Chicago's implementation actually has some similarity here. Their chart looks more complicated because there's about 20 pathways. It's really similar here. We put our pathways into buckets, and they kind of listed them all across. But there's this big matrix in Chicago, and there are many ways to be compliant. One of the things that's as sort of a citizen, I'm proud of. If I were a building owner, I might feel differently. But Colorado's is the first program that applies to existing buildings with new roofs as a compliance measure. You mentioned that like Washington, D.C. has, and Chicago, by the way, has, for existing buildings, there's like an incentive to do it.
Right.
But there's not a compliance.
Right.
So we are the first city to have existing buildings have
a requirement for it.
And you pointed this out, you didn't highlight it, but it was in your presentation there, is that the recommendation is that they're now called a green building ordinance.
Right.
Not green roof ordinance.
Right.
So there is an emphasis on.
Yep.
It's
Transitioning.
more holistic.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure. Jim, did you still have a question or no?
Well, I was just thinking from a design, from an engineering standpoint, I used to own a flat roof building. And if I were going to green my roof, I would be not putting stuff directly on the roof, I would have a
Build it up.
structure that's supported by the exterior walls.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't add any weight to the roof. And it would protect the roof, which would be, say, a foot or two underneath the screen structure
Right.
from hail and from other damage, and extend the life of the roof.
That way, right. Very smart.
And
Yes,
also
that would make
it
sense.
have its own drainage, so that the water wouldn't just be filtering down with soil onto the roof, but would be actually, any surplus water
Right.
would be ducted away to the downspouts.
And I anticipate that firms like EcoRoof, but more importantly like structural engineers that get involved with this, would be recommending pathways like that, or they have to come talk to you, Jim, and learn something a little bit. But they, they should be doing that. But what's going to be great is the conversation that'll be had about having people think about that, and say, hey, it can be done, and it's not going to create structural problems for you if we do the following way. But then still seeing the cost, but then say, but hey, your energy score was a 6 out of 100. Wouldn't you rather just invest in making your building work better, kind of like your building? Hopefully they'd all go as far as you. People should come see Jim's building on the Solar Home Tour because it's a fantastic example of what can be done in commercial buildings. But basically, why not do that? Why not invest the money there? But it'll be great. It'll be great having those options, since the task force and the city council seems to be very much on board with saying give options, give these pathways for people to reach a sustainable conclusion on how to get there. And I think that's awesome. So we'll take, I'll say it's 1 o'clock. Anyone who wants to get out, please do, but I'll continue to take a couple more questions if people want to hang and hear that. But yeah.
Timeline and penalty. So if it passes in January, then people immediately have to comply.
Well, people already need to be compliant.
See,
It started in January of this year. And so if someone is getting a roof permit this afternoon, they have to comply with the existing law that's on the books, which is a bit more constrained and doesn't have as much flexibility. But there is no free pass.
All right, and as far as the penalty?
Penalty for not complying. There is, I guess I would say that, like a lot of things like this, especially as we get used to it, I don't think there's a lot of teeth in this ordinance. Denver actually, one great thing that
Call
we
me.
have is this
Don't they get to catch up?
program, which also does not have penalties. But the fact that buildings are expected to report in the same size category means that that is sort of the mechanism to be able to say you are compliant, or 3 years after you replace your roof, we can tell that you're not compliant. So there is it's like a hand in glove, and Denver Energize and this work hand in glove on being able to monitor compliance, but there aren't penalties.
Right.
There are not penalties baked in this, to my knowledge.
A key thing is to, Jesse Goldman, who I know, the architect over here, his question about becoming code is a really important one, because if the building department is saying you must, as opposed to, I know right now, my understanding is right now they're trying to give people a little latitude, saying there's a task force working on implementation, and they're trusting that no one's going to sue, is basically what they're doing right now by saying we're going to give a little latitude because we know the task force is working on making something better. Because as of now, at least according to EcoRoof, they've had nobody that they've done a roof for that has had to do the green roof. So if the building department isn't saying, you must, because that's for the architects, the builders, the improvement contractors, the building department says, you must, they're all like, oh, we must. And then they do it, as opposed to, oh, we can step a little bit out of this and find another pathway. Yeah. It's like,
I wish I had a crisp answer for that, but I believe that it's now part of the building code, to your question earlier.
Yeah, the Denver Building Code has amendments to it, but if it's not part of that, it seems very different than if it's just an ordinance.
right.
From definitely a lot of different points of view, whether you're a building owner, whether you're an architect trying to submit, whether you're a contractor trying to get inspections done.
Yeah,
code and ordinance are totally different.
For me, I feel like I'm just not smart enough to know. It probably is not technically part of the building code. Like, in other words, you can't go to a paragraph and a line.
Mm-hmm.
But it is attached to the building permit process for the roof.
Right.
I think there's probably a slight difference in those two things.
Right. But knowing you, you'll bring it up in the
Yeah.
next meeting, so that's very good. That'll be very good. Okay. Martin.
One quick one. I remember a statistic from a previous talk that said something like every 11 years, commercial apartment buildings will turn over. And the mechanism is basically that owners try not to invest anything at all, and then shed it and have the next owner deal with all the necessary renovations. What happens when you sell a building? Is the next owner then on the hook for doing the green roof stuff, or is it just tied to the roof repair?
Yeah, the nice simplicity of it is at the time you're replacing a roof, at the time you're getting a permit, I'll point over here, I guess, to replace a roof, but it's really like Eco Roof is the company pulling those permits, or roofing companies like that. We gotta go get a permit to do this. We have to have an inspector come check to make sure we don't leave it so it's gonna leak like crazy. It's then that's when it's should be coming up as a requirement once this gets into full ordinance. I hope it's not a situation where it would require people coming together and say, oh, I guess we have to sue the city because it's an ordinance that people are sidestepping, and the building department hasn't chosen to put teeth to it to say it's a requirement to get it to happen, but it may, because that's what would happen with an ordinance. It would take, okay, I'm a business owner in the city of Denver, so therefore I have standing, as I'd see it. I could be part of saying, I'm going to file suit because you're not enforcing an ordinance. I hope it doesn't have to come to that, but it may have to come to that. Yeah. But yeah, it should be only at the time when they're replacing a roof, regardless of, you bought it last week, too bad for you. You have to replace your roof, so you have to do it. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, grab flyers. Thank you.